At 75, she stepped into a rusted train car and watched the ceiling shift above her. Evelyn Hartwell had nowhere left to go when she found the Pullman. It sat alone in the dry land, half swallowed by weeds, quiet in a way that felt older than time. Inside, the air was thick with dust and forgotten years, until one night, as the wind pressed against the walls, something above her moved. Not broken, not falling, shifting, as if it had been waiting. If you were in her place, would you open it or walk away? There is a certain kind of quiet that comes after a decision has already been made. Not the quiet of an empty room, not the quiet of early morning, something else. Something that settles in your chest and stays there. Evelyn Hartwell felt it before her daughter even spoke. The kitchen still smelled faintly of coffee and toasted bread, the same as every morning. The same chipped mug sat beside the sink, the one Evelyn had used for years without thinking about it. Outside, a soft gray light pressed against the window, the kind that comes just before sunrise in Portland. Cool, damp, patient. Her daughter, Marlene, stood near the counter, hands folded. Not nervous, just careful. "We've been talking," she said. Evelyn nodded once, slowly. She had already noticed the shift in the house these past weeks. Doors closing a little sooner. Conversations that paused when she entered. Small things, the kind you could ignore if you wanted to. "We're going to need the room," Marlene continued. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "With the baby coming. You understand." The words didn't land all at once. They arrived in pieces. Need the room. The baby. You understand. Evelyn looked at her daughter's face. Not cold, not unkind. Just decided. She did understand. Not in the way Marlene meant, but in the way you understand when a door is already closing and your hand is still on the frame. "Yes," Evelyn said. Her voice sounded normal. That surprised her. Marlene let out a breath, almost relieved. "I knew you would." There was more. There were suggestions. A senior apartment someone had mentioned, a phone number written down somewhere. But Evelyn didn't follow most of it. The words moved past her like traffic she wasn't part of. She stood there for a moment longer. Then she turned. The hallway felt narrower than it used to. Her room, the spare room as it had always been called, sat at the end. The door was half open. Inside, everything was exactly where she had left it. The quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. The small dresser against the wall. A framed photograph of her and Thomas on the coast, taken years ago when the wind had been so strong they could barely keep their eyes open. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Not all the way. Just enough. Packing didn't take long. It couldn't. Evelyn had learned over time how to live with less. Not because she wanted to, just because life had slowly trimmed things away. She opened the closet, ran her hand along the sleeves of her coats, stopped at one. A thick gray one Thomas had bought her years ago. She took it down and laid it across the bed. 2 suitcases, one for clothes, one for everything else. She moved slowly, not because she was unsure what to take, but because each object asked a quiet question. Do you still belong to me? A pair of shoes she hadn't worn in months. A stack of folded sweaters. A small tin box tucked into the back of the dresser drawer. She paused at that. The tin was old, dented at one corner. She opened it without thinking. Inside were things she hadn't looked at in years. Receipts, a few keys, bits of paper with faded writing. Nothing important. Nothing she could name. Still, she held it a second longer than necessary. Then she placed it into the suitcase. The photograph came last. She lifted it carefully. The glass was cool beneath her fingers. Thomas stood beside her in the picture, smiling in that quiet way he always had. Not wide, not loud, just steady. She didn't speak. There wasn't anything to say that hadn't already been said, somewhere, years ago. She wrapped the frame in a scarf and slid it into the second suitcase. When she was done, the room looked almost the same. That struck her, as if she had never been there at all. She sat on the edge of the bed, just for a moment. Her knees ached slightly, the familiar kind of ache, predictable, manageable. Outside the door, she could hear movement, cabinets opening, a chair shifting across the floor. Life continuing. Evelyn stood up. She took one last look around the room, not searching, not hoping, just seeing. Then she picked up the suitcases. The hallway was dim. The kitchen light had been turned off. Marlene wasn't there anymore. A note sat on the counter. Something about calling when she got settled. Evelyn didn't read it. She walked to the front door. The floor creaked softly beneath her weight, the same sound it had made for years. Her hand rested on the doorknob. For a second, just one, she felt it. The pull to turn around, to look at the living room, the couch, the window where the light came in every afternoon, the small details that had once added up to something larger. But she didn't. Looking back would have meant believing there was something left behind for her. And there wasn't. She opened the door. The air outside was cold and damp. It carried the smell of wet leaves and distant rain. The street was empty. No cars. No footsteps. Just the quiet hum of a city not fully awake. Evelyn stepped out and closed the door behind her. The sound of it clicking shut was soft, almost gentle. She adjusted her grip on the suitcases and started walking. The sky was beginning to lighten, a thin line of pale blue stretching along the horizon. She didn't hurry. There was nowhere she needed to be yet, only somewhere she could no longer stay. And as she moved down the sidewalk, her steps slow but steady, the quiet followed her. Not pressing, not heavy, just there, like something that had made room for her and wasn't letting go. The bus station smelled of old vinyl and burnt coffee. Evelyn stepped inside just as the sky shifted from gray to pale blue. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright for the hour. A man behind the counter barely looked up when she approached. His voice was flat, practiced. "Where to?" She paused. The question felt larger than it should have. "East," she said after a moment. "As far as this will take me." She set a folded bill on the counter. He counted it without expression, printed a ticket, and slid it across. No conversation, no curiosity. Just another passenger. Evelyn took the ticket and moved toward the row of plastic chairs near the window. They were cold when she sat down. Her suitcases rested at her feet, close enough that she could feel their presence without looking. Outside, a bus idled, a low, steady rumble, diesel thick in the air. She had not eaten. She realized that only when she saw a vending machine glowing in the corner. Rows of snacks behind scratched glass. She considered it, then didn't move. Hunger didn't feel urgent yet. The bus ride began without ceremony. A soft hiss of doors closing. A shift. Then movement. Portland slipped away in pieces. Streets she recognized at first, then ones she didn't. Buildings gave way to trees to stretches of highway lined with wet fields and low fog. Evelyn took a window seat. She placed her smaller suitcase beside her and rested her hands on top of it, not gripping, just resting. The rhythm of the road settled in quickly, a steady sway, tires humming against asphalt, occasional bumps that traveled up through the seat into her spine. People around her slept, heads tilted, mouths slightly open. A young woman across the aisle tapped on her phone, the screen lighting her face in pulses. Evelyn didn't sleep. She watched. Miles passed. The light changed. Morning grew into something clearer, sharper. The sky widened as the city thinned behind them. At some point, she didn't know exactly when, she reached down and unlatched her suitcase. Not because she needed anything, just to check. The zipper slid open with a soft, familiar sound. Inside, everything was where she had placed it. Folded clothes, the wrapped photograph, the small tin box. Her hand moved to it without thinking. She lifted it out and rested it on her lap. For a moment, she simply looked at it. The dented corner, the faint scratches across the lid. It felt lighter than she remembered. Or maybe her hands had changed. She opened it. Inside, the same small collection of things. Keys she no longer used. Receipts that had faded to a pale gray. Paper folded into shapes that no longer held meaning. She began to sift through them slowly. One piece at a time. A receipt from a grocery store that no longer existed. A note in her own handwriting. Numbers written without context. A small metal key she didn't recognize. Then, a thicker piece of paper, folded twice. She paused before opening it. There was no reason to hesitate. Still, she did. Then she unfolded it carefully. It was a receipt, not recent. The ink had softened with time, but the words were still legible. Deschutes County Property Tax. The name printed near the top made her still. Hartwell, Evelyn, and Thomas. Her eyes moved slowly down the page. A parcel number, a payment date, an amount that, at the time, had probably felt small. She frowned slightly. She didn't remember this. Not clearly. She held the paper closer to the window, letting the daylight sharpen the faded ink. Her lips pressed together, not in confusion, but in concentration. Something stirred. Not a full memory, just the edge of one. A voice. Thomas's voice. Not loud, never loud, just there, steady, as he had always been, out past Red Basin. Nothing much, just an old rail car sitting there. Figured I'd hold on to it. She blinked. The bus continued forward. The sound of the engine filled the space between her thoughts. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to rest, but to listen. The memory shifted, trying to settle. She saw him standing at the kitchen sink in their old house, sleeves rolled up, drying a plate with a dish towel, saying it like it wasn't important. Just something he had done. She had been at the table, sorting mail, half listening. Maybe she had nodded. Maybe she hadn't responded at all. Life had been full then. Too full to follow small threads. Her eyes opened again. She looked down at the receipt. Red Basin. The name sat quietly on the page. She turned it over. Nothing on the back. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper. Slow, careful. Why had she kept this? Not in a folder, not with anything organized. Just inside a tin box, mixed with things that no longer mattered. Unless... She looked back out the window. The landscape had changed. Drier now. the green fading into stretches of brown and pale gold, the trees thinner, the sky larger. It felt different, less contained. The thought came without warning. What if it wasn't nothing? She didn't say it out loud. Didn't need to. She folded the receipt again. Once. Then again. More carefully this time. As if it deserved that. She placed it back in the tin. Closed the lid. But she didn't return it to the suitcase. She kept it in her hands. The bus hit a rough patch of road. A sharp jolt. The passengers shifted slightly, then settled again. Evelyn adjusted her grip. Her fingers rested along the edge of the tin, feeling its shape, its weight. Red Basin. She said it silently. Tried it again. The name felt unfamiliar, but not wrong. Just distant. The driver's voice came over the speaker, announcing the next stop, a small town, temporary, a place where some would get off, others would climb on. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't need to. The direction had already begun to form. Not clearly, not completely, but enough. She would go east. Far enough. Then she would find out if Red Basin was still there. If the rail car was still there. If Thomas had meant anything by it at all. Or if it had been just another small detail in a life too busy to hold on to. She leaned her head lightly against the window. The glass was cool. The road stretched ahead. And for the first time since stepping out of the house that morning, she wasn't just leaving. She was going somewhere, even if she didn't yet understand why. The bus left her at a stop that barely looked like one. No building, no shelter, just a cracked stretch of pavement and a sun-bleached sign leaning slightly to one side. The driver opened the door, nodded once, and didn't ask questions. Evelyn stepped down carefully, 1 foot at a time, feeling the ground settle beneath her. The bus pulled away almost immediately. Its engine noise faded quickly, swallowed by the open land. Dust lifted behind it, then drifted down again, slow and quiet. And then nothing. No traffic. No voices, no distant hum of a city, just wind. It moved low across the ground, carrying the dry scent of sagebrush and something metallic she couldn't place. The sky stretched wide above her, pale and cloudless. It made everything else feel smaller. She adjusted her grip on the suitcases. The road ahead wasn't much of a road, more like a suggestion of one. 2 worn lines cutting through dirt and scrub, bending gently toward a cluster of low hills in the distance. Red Basin. She looked down at the folded receipt in her hand, then back up. There was no sign pointing the way, no marker confirming she had arrived anywhere meaningful. Just land. Evelyn started walking. The ground was uneven, packed dirt in some places, loose gravel in others. Her shoes picked up dust with each step. The air felt thinner here, drier. It carried less weight than the damp mornings she was used to. She didn't rush. There was no reason to. Her pace settled into something steady, measured, the kind of rhythm her body understood, even if the destination was uncertain. The suitcases rolled behind her, wheels catching occasionally on stones. Each time she paused, lifted slightly, adjusted. The sun climbed slowly. Heat followed. Not sharp at first, just present. After a while, the silence changed. Not broken, just layered. A faint buzz of insects somewhere in the brush, the distant call of something she couldn't see. wind moving through dry branches, producing a soft clicking sound. Time stretched. Minutes blurred into something longer. Evelyn stopped once, resting her hands on the suitcase handles. Her knees complained. A dull, familiar ache. She breathed in slowly. The air smelled stronger here. Earth and dry grass. A hint of rust, though there was nothing around her that should have carried it. She noticed that. Filed it away. Then she continued. The land began to shift subtly. The flat stretch gave way to a shallow incline. The hills she had seen earlier were closer now, their shapes more defined. The ground here held patches of darker soil, scattered with low shrubs that looked half alive. And then she saw it. At first, it didn't register as anything specific. Just a shape. Low, long, out of place. She stopped walking. Her eyes narrowed slightly, focusing. The shape resolved slowly, like something surfacing through fog. Metal. Faded green, almost gray now, edges softened by time, one end slightly lower than the other, as if the ground beneath it had shifted. The railcar. It sat alone in a shallow clearing, surrounded by tall, dry weeds that brushed against its sides. No tracks beneath it, just rusted wheels half sunk into the earth. Evelyn didn't move for a moment. She stood there, the wind brushing lightly against her coat, her breath steady. Then she took a step forward. The closer she got, the more details appeared. The paint, once smooth, now peeled in strips, exposing layers beneath. Small patches of exposed metal had turned a deep reddish brown. The windows were clouded with grime, opaque from the outside. One of them was cracked. Not shattered, just a thin, jagged line running from one corner inward. She circled it slowly. The length of it surprised her. Longer than she had imagined. Taller, too. It carried a presence not imposing, but stubborn, like it had decided to remain, regardless of whether it belonged. Her eyes moved carefully over its surface. She noticed how the weeds leaned slightly toward one side, as if the wind favored that direction. How the ground beneath the wheels dipped unevenly. How one of the side panels had buckled just enough to catch light differently. Details. Small things. She reached out, almost without thinking, and placed her hand against the metal. It was warm. Not from anything inside, just the sun. Still, it felt solid. More solid than it looked. "Well," she said quietly. Her voice sounded different out here, thinner, less absorbed. "You're still here." The words drifted away quickly. No echo. Evelyn moved toward one end of the rail car. A set of steps hung there, rusted but intact. One of the rails leaned slightly outward, as if it had been pulled or loosened over time. She tested the first step with her foot. It held. She shifted her weight slowly, her hands gripping the rail, careful not to trust it fully. The second step creaked. She paused, listened. Nothing changed. She climbed the rest of the way up. The door at the top was partially open, not wide, just enough to suggest it had been forced at some point, or simply left that way. She pushed it gently. It gave with a low, drawn-out sound, metal against metal. The air inside met her immediately. Stale, dry, thick with dust. Something else beneath it, faint, but present. Old wood, fabric, time. Evelyn stood in the doorway for a moment, letting her eyes adjust. Light filtered in through the windows in thin, uneven strips. Particles of dust floated in the air, moving slowly, as if suspended. She stepped inside. The floor creaked under her weight. Not weak, just unused. Rows of seats stretched along the length of the car. Their leather cracked and faded. Some tilted slightly. Others remained upright, as if waiting. Overhead racks lined the walls. Empty. Except for dust. Evelyn moved forward slowly, one hand brushing lightly along the back of a seat. The texture surprised her. Rough, dry, but still there. Nothing had been completely taken. Just left. She stopped near the center, turned in a slow circle, took it in. The silence here was different from outside, contained. The wind still found its way in, through cracks, through seams, but it sounded distant, filtered. The railcar held its own kind of quiet. Evelyn set her suitcases down. The sound echoed slightly, then faded. She stood there a moment longer, her eyes moving across the space, noticing without trying. A loose panel near the far end. A slight dip in the floor near one set of seats. The way the ceiling curved, smooth in most places, but uneven in others. She didn't think much of it. Not yet. She walked toward one of the windows and wiped a small circle in the dust with her sleeve. Light broke through. Outside, the land stretched exactly as it had before. Open, empty, wide. But now, she was inside something. Something that had been waiting. Not for her, necessarily. But still, waiting. Evelyn rested her hand lightly against the window frame. Then she turned back into the railcar, her gaze moving slowly from one end to the other. There was work here. That much was clear. But for the first time since she had stepped off the bus, the quiet inside her shifted. Just slightly. Not gone, not lighter, but different. As if it had found somewhere to settle, and wasn't quite as alone. Evelyn stood in the center of the rail car for a long time before she moved again. Not thinking, not deciding, just standing. The light shifted slowly through the dusty windows, sliding across the cracked leather seats, catching in the floating particles that never quite settled. The air felt still, but not empty. It held on to sound differently. Every small movement lingered a second longer than expected. She bent down and pulled one of the suitcases closer. The zipper opened with a soft pull. She took out the gray coat and folded it across the back of a seat near the window. It wasn't much, but it marked something. A place. She set the second suitcase beside it. For now, that would be enough. The first task came without her choosing it. Dust. It was everywhere. Thick in the corners, layered along the floor, clinging to the seats, the racks, the narrow ledges beneath the windows. Evelyn ran her fingers across the back of a seat and held them up. Gray, fine, dry. She looked around. Then she started. There was no broom, no tools. So she used what she had. A folded newspaper from her suitcase, a scarf, her hands. She moved slowly down the aisle, pushing dust into small piles, brushing it away from where she planned to sit. The motion was steady, repetitive, almost calming. At times she had to stop. Not because she was tired, because the dust would rise too quickly, filling the air, forcing her to step back and let it settle again. She learned to move slower, to disturb less. By midday, the light had changed. The railcar felt warmer now, the metal holding the heat. The smell shifted slightly too, less stale, more open, as if something long sealed had been disturbed. Evelyn wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. She hadn't realized she was sweating. She stepped outside briefly. The air hit her differently now, cleaner, sharper. She stood on the rusted steps, breathing in the scent of sage and dry earth. The wind had picked up, brushing against the tall weeds, making them whisper in low, uneven patterns. It sounded like movement, but there was nothing there. She turned back inside. The contrast struck her immediately. Outside, the world stretched in every direction. Inside, everything narrowed, focused, contained. She liked that, not because it was comfortable, but because it was manageable. She sat down on one of the seats she had cleared. The leather gave slightly beneath her weight, a faint crackling sound, like something remembering how to bend. Her knees ached. She let them. There was no reason to push through it. Not here. Not anymore. She reached for the tin box again, resting it on her lap without opening it this time, just holding it. Listening. The railcar responded in its own way. Small sounds at first. A faint tick somewhere above her, a soft shifting along one of the walls, the distant creak of metal adjusting to heat. None of it was alarming, just present, like the place was slowly waking up. By late afternoon, Evelyn had chosen her corner. Not the center, not the far end, but a space along the side where one of the windows let in more light than the others. The floor there felt more level. The air moved just enough to keep it from becoming stale. She placed her coat more carefully now, smoothing it across the seat. Then she arranged the rest. A small stack of folded clothes, the photograph, still wrapped, the tin box beside it. Simple, intentional. It wasn't much, but it was hers. As the sun began to lower, the light inside the railcar changed again. Warmer now. Gold slipping through the dusty glass, stretching long shadows across the floor. The edges of things softened. The rust along the metal walls caught the light differently, almost glowing in places. Evelyn noticed that. She noticed how one section of the wall held the light longer than the others, how the ceiling curved above her, not perfectly smooth, but not entirely uneven either. There were small variations, barely visible, but there. She didn't think about it. Not yet. Evening came quietly. The temperature dropped faster than she expected. The heat that had built up during the day faded, leaving the metal cold to the touch. Evelyn pulled her coat around her shoulders and sat back against the seat. The sounds changed again. The wind grew louder now, slipping through gaps she hadn't noticed before. It found its way into the seams, along the edges, creating a low, uneven whistle that rose and fell without pattern. Then a sharper sound. A creak. Not from the floor. From above. Evelyn's eyes lifted slightly. She listened. Nothing followed. She let it go. Night settled in fully. The light outside disappeared, replaced by darkness that felt heavier than the day had been. The railcar held it differently, more contained, but deeper somehow. Evelyn didn't have a light. She didn't need one. She sat still, letting her eyes adjust. Shapes slowly returned. Outlines, shadows, the faintest suggestion of space. The quiet deepened. Not empty. Never empty. just filled with things she couldn't quite name. She lay down carefully along the seat, her coat folded beneath her head. The leather was stiff, but it held. Her body adjusted. Slowly. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the place, the distant wind, the occasional creak, the soft settling of metal cooling in the night air. She closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come right away. But it came. In pieces. And each time she woke, the railcar was still there. Holding. Waiting. Not asking anything from her. Just allowing her to stay. And somewhere in the middle of the night, between one shallow sleep and the next, Evelyn realized something. Not fully, not clearly, just the beginning of it. This place wasn't just shelter. It had structure, pattern, details that didn't belong to decay alone. She didn't open her eyes, didn't move, but the thought stayed with her. Quiet. Patient. Like something that had been there long before she arrived and had no intention of leaving. Morning came slowly, not with noise, but with light. A thin line at first, slipping through the dirt-streaked windows, then more of it, spreading across the floor in pale strips. The air was colder than she expected. The metal had lost all its warmth overnight. Evelyn opened her eyes without moving. She listened. The railcar was quiet again. Not empty. Never empty. But settled. She pushed herself upright, her joints stiff from the narrow seat. Her hand rested briefly on the surface beside her, feeling the texture, dry, cracked, but still firm. The place had held. That mattered more than she expected. She stood, slowly, and stepped into the aisle. The light revealed what she had done the day before. Small patches of cleared space, lines in the dust where her hands had moved things aside. It wasn't much, but it was visible. Proof of effort. She stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the cold air. The land looked different in the morning, less harsh, more exposed. Every detail sharper, every shadow thinner. Then she went back inside. There was more to do. She moved with purpose now, not urgency, just direction. She worked along the far side of the railcar first, clearing more dust, pushing debris toward the corners, using a piece of broken wood she found near the door as a makeshift tool. It was slower work today, more deliberate. She paused often, not from fatigue but to observe, to notice. The way the floor dipped slightly near one row of seats, the way one window let in more air than the others, the way certain sounds carried differently depending on where she stood. She didn't think of it as investigating, just paying attention. By midday, the sun had climbed higher. The light shifted overhead, catching the ceiling more directly. That's when she saw it. Not clearly at first, just a difference. One section above the luggage racks, toward the middle of the car, looked duller. The dust there hadn't settled the same way. It formed a faint outline, almost like a border. Evelyn stepped closer. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She stood directly beneath it now, tilting her head just enough to study the surface. The ceiling curved smoothly across most of the car. But here, something was off. Not damaged, not broken. Just not quite the same. She reached up slowly, her fingers brushing against the metal. Dust came away easily. She wiped a small section clean. The surface underneath felt smoother than she expected, less worn, as if it hadn't been exposed in quite the same way as the rest. Evelyn stepped back, looked again. The difference remained. Subtle, but real. She moved a few feet down the aisle and looked back at it from a different angle. The light shifted across the surface. Yes, there it was. A faint line, running across the edge of the panel, too straight to be random, too clean to be damage. Evelyn didn't react immediately. She had learned that much already. Not everything needed to be answered at once. She went back to her work. But the thought stayed. Later, when the sun had moved and the light softened again, she returned to that spot. This time, she brought one of the smaller wooden pieces with her. She stood beneath the panel and reached up again. Her fingers pressed lightly against the surface, then harder. Nothing. She tapped it once with her knuckles. A dull sound. She tapped again, a few inches to the side. The sound changed. Not much, but enough. She paused, listened, tapped again in the same place. The sound was different. Hollow. Not fully empty, but not solid either. Evelyn lowered her hand slowly. She didn't smile, didn't speak. But something inside her sharpened. She moved along the length of the panel, tapping lightly at different points, listening carefully each time. Most of it sounded the same. Dense. Unmoving. But that one section, it responded differently. She stepped back again, looked up, then down the length of the car, then back up. Her mind moved quietly, connecting small things. Thomas. The way he used to fix things without saying much. The way he preferred to work alone, late at night, when the house was still. The way he never left anything unfinished. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Did you?" she said under her breath. The words didn't carry far. The railcar absorbed them. She reached up again. This time, her fingers pressed along the edge where the faint line ran. She pushed. Nothing. She adjusted her position, pressed again, slightly to the side. Still nothing. She let her arm drop. Not frustrated, just considering. She stepped onto one of the seats carefully, testing her weight before shifting fully. The leather creaked beneath her, but held. From this angle, she could see the panel more clearly. The line was real. Not imagined. Her hand traced it slowly. It felt slightly raised, or maybe the rest of the ceiling had worn down around it. She pressed again. Nothing. Evelyn climbed down. She didn't try again immediately. Instead, she walked to the other end of the railcar and sat down. Her hands rested in her lap, her breathing steady. She looked at the space she had cleared, at the light moving across the floor, at the small details she had begun to understand. Then her gaze lifted again, toward the ceiling. That section, that difference. It wasn't an accident. It couldn't be. But it also wasn't obvious. Whoever had made it that way hadn't wanted it to be. That thought stayed with her, not loud, not urgent, just present. Evelyn stood again. She walked back to the center of the car, looked up once more, then reached for the seat, climbed again, pressed again. This time, she changed the angle, just slightly. Her palm flat, her fingers angled along the edge instead of pressing straight up. She pushed. The panel didn't move. But something shifted barely. So small she might have missed it if she hadn't been watching for it. A soft resistance. Then stillness again. Evelyn froze. Her hand remained where it was. Her breath slowed. She didn't push again. Not yet. She lowered herself carefully back to the floor. Her eyes stayed on the ceiling. The difference was there. The response had been real. She knew that now. This wasn't just wear. This wasn't time. This was design. Evelyn stepped back slowly, creating space between herself and the panel, as if distance might make it clearer. It didn't. But it confirmed something else. There was more to this place than she had seen, more than she had expected. She didn't rush toward it, didn't climb again. Instead, she turned away, walked back to her corner, sat down, and waited. Because for the first time since she had arrived, she wasn't just staying here, she was beginning to understand it. The rest of the day passed quietly. Evelyn did not climb back onto the seat. She did not press the panel again. Instead, she worked. Not to distract herself, but to think. She cleared more space along the aisle, moved loose debris toward the far end, wiped down another section of seats, slower this time, her attention dividing between what her hands were doing and what her mind was holding onto. The ceiling, that faint line, that slight give, it stayed with her. Not urgent, just waiting. By late afternoon, the air inside the rail car had warmed again. The smell of dust softened into something more neutral, less abandoned, more lived in. Evelyn stepped outside once more. The sky had changed. Clouds gathered low and uneven along the horizon, not thick, but heavy enough to dim the light. The wind carried a different edge now, cooler, sharper, with a faint metallic taste she couldn't name. She stood there longer than usual, watching, listening. The land gave its own kind of warning. The weeds shifted faster. The distant brush bent in uneven waves. The silence between sounds shortened, filled now with a low, restless movement. A storm. Not the kind she knew from Portland. Something drier, more direct. Evelyn turned back inside. The railcar felt different now, too. The air seemed tighter, the quiet, less settled. She moved through her space with more purpose, checked the door, adjusted her coat, set her belongings closer together, as if preparing for something she couldn't fully define. The first gust hit without much sound, just pressure. A push against the metal walls that traveled through the structure in a low, steady vibration. Then came the second, stronger. The railcar responded. A long creak stretched from one end to the other, like something adjusting its weight. Evelyn stood still in the center of the aisle. Her eyes lifted slightly. The ceiling. She listened. Another gust. This time the sound followed, wind slipping through cracks, finding edges, pressing against surfaces not meant to move. Dust loosened from above. Not much. Just enough to fall in a thin line near the middle of the car. Exactly where she had noticed the difference. Evelyn didn't move right away. Her breathing stayed even, her hands at her sides. Another gust came, sharper now. The railcar shifted slightly on its frame. Not enough to move, but enough to be felt. A low thud echoed from somewhere beneath. Then a faint sound. Soft. Almost nothing, but distinct. A slight slide. Evelyn's head tilted upward. There. That section of the ceiling. It hadn't opened, but it had moved. She stepped forward. Slowly. The wind pressed again, harder this time. The metal frame responded with a deeper groan, the entire structure holding against the force. Dust fell again. More of it now. Evelyn reached the spot beneath the panel. She didn't hesitate. She pulled one of the seats closer with a short scrape across the floor. Climbed up. Careful. Steady. The railcar rocked slightly beneath her, just enough to remind her of its age. Her hand rose, found the edge, the same line, the same place. She pressed. Nothing. The wind hit again, stronger now, rattling the windows, pushing through the seams. The railcar answered. A sharp crack sounded from above, not breaking, but shifting. Evelyn adjusted her position. Her palm flattened against the panel, fingers angled along the edge like before. She pushed again. This time, it gave. Not fully. Just enough. A small shift to the side, metal against metal. A sound too clean to be accidental. Evelyn froze. Her breath caught, just slightly. She didn't pull away, didn't rush. She pressed again, firmer now. The panel slid. Slow, controlled. As if it had been waiting for exactly this. A narrow gap opened above her, dark inside. Hidden. Evelyn stared at it. The wind roared outside now, pressing against the rail car in steady waves. The structure creaked and held, each sound louder, closer. But inside, there was something else. A stillness within that opening. Untouched. She didn't reach in immediately. Her hand hovered there just beneath the gap. Her mind moved carefully, not jumping ahead. This wasn't random. This wasn't damage. This had been built. Deliberately. Evelyn lowered herself down slowly, stepping off the seat with the same care she had used climbing up. Her eyes never left the ceiling. The panel remained slightly open. Not wide, but enough. Enough to prove what she had felt. She stood in the aisle, the storm pressing harder now, the sounds around her rising and falling in uneven bursts, but her focus stayed fixed. On that gap, on what it meant. The quiet inside her shifted again. Not the emptiness from before. Not even the steadiness she had found here. Something sharper. Clearer. A question, forming without words. Evelyn moved the seat back into place. Not to hide anything. Just to reset. She stepped back a few feet, looked again. The ceiling, the opening, the difference. It was real, and it had been there all along. The storm didn't stop, but something else did. The waiting. Evelyn stood there, in the middle of the rail car, listening to the wind press against the walls, feeling the structure hold around her. And for the first time since she had arrived, she knew this place was not abandoned. It had been left, for a reason. And whatever that reason was, it had just begun to reveal itself. The storm did not pass quickly. It stayed. Wind pressed against the rail car in long, steady waves. The metal walls answered with low groans, the sound traveling from one end to the other, like something alive and breathing. Evelyn did not rush. She stood where she was, watching the narrow opening above, waiting for the noise outside to settle just enough. Not silence, just less. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time moved differently inside the rail car now. When the wind eased for a moment, just enough to hear her own breath again, she stepped forward. The seat beneath the panel scraped softly as she pulled it back into position. She climbed again. Carefully. The gap in the ceiling was still there. unchanged, dark inside. She lifted her hand, paused just before reaching in. Not fear. Something else. Respect. For what had been hidden. For how long it had stayed hidden. Then she reached in. Her fingers met fabric first. Not loose. Wrapped. She felt along the edges, testing the shape without pulling. A bundle. Secured. She shifted her grip, steadying herself against the seat with her other hand. Then slowly, she drew it out. Dust followed it, falling in soft trails around her. The bundle was heavier than it looked, wrapped in something thick. Canvas, maybe. The material was stiff with age but intact. Evelyn climbed down carefully, holding it close. The storm pressed again, louder now, but she barely registered it. Her attention stayed fixed on what she held. She set it down on the seat. Her hands rested on it for a moment, feeling its weight, the shape beneath the fabric. Then she began to unwrap it. Slowly, layer by layer. The canvas loosened with a faint crackle. The folds opened, revealing something darker beneath. A satchel. Leather. Worn, but well kept. The surface was smooth in places, creased in others. The color deepened with time. The strap had been tucked neatly around it, as if whoever placed it here had expected it to be found. Eventually. Evelyn ran her fingers across the top, then turned it slightly. There. Stamped into the leather. Faint, but still visible. T.H. Thomas Hartwell. She didn't react outwardly, didn't speak. But her hand stayed there longer than necessary. Then she opened it. The clasp resisted slightly, then gave with a soft click. Inside, paper. Carefully arranged, not loose, not random, ordered. She lifted the first stack. Documents. Old but preserved, the edges slightly curled, the ink still clear. She sat down. The storm faded into the background. Her world narrowed again, to the pages in her hands. She read. Slowly, each word, each line. Her eyes moved with care, as if rushing might cause something to disappear. Land records, parcel numbers, descriptions, coordinates. Her name appeared more than once. Evelyn Hartwell. Not beside Thomas. Alone. She paused, looked closer, compared the signatures, the handwriting. It was his. She knew it without question. She turned the page. More records. Transfers. Dates she barely remembered. Some she didn't remember at all. She reached for another set of papers. These were different. Smaller. Bound together with a thin piece of string. She untied it carefully. Notes. Handwritten. Not formal. Not official. Just his writing. Short lines. Measurements. Observations. Mentions of the railcar. Its structure. The way it had been positioned. Reinforcements. Hidden spaces. Evelyn's eyes slowed. She read each line twice. Then again, comparing. Matching what she saw on the page with what she had already noticed inside the railcar. The uneven floor, the panel, the materials. None of it had been random. He had planned this. Not quickly, not carelessly, piece by piece, over time. Evelyn leaned back slightly, the papers still in her hands. Her gaze lifted, not to the ceiling, not to the storm, but inward. She thought of him, standing in their kitchen, fixing things without explanation, moving through his work with quiet certainty, never announcing what he was doing, just doing it. She looked down again, at her name, on the documents. Not added later, not corrected, placed there. From the beginning. Her hand rested lightly on the page. She didn't rush to the next one. She let it sit, let it settle. The storm outside began to ease, not fully, but enough. The sounds softened, the pressure lessened. Inside, the railcar felt steadier. Evelyn gathered the papers carefully, placed them back into the satchel. Not exactly how they had been, but close. Intentional. She closed the clasp. The soft click echoed faintly. Then she sat there, the satchel beside her, her hands resting in her lap, her breathing slow. The quiet inside her had changed again. Not emptiness, not even steadiness. Something deeper, more grounded. She looked up toward the ceiling, the panel still slightly open, the place where this had been hidden, not lost, not forgotten, hidden. Evelyn stood, walked slowly to the center of the railcar, looked up at that space again, then back down at the satchel. Her mind moved through it all. The house, the morning, the bus, the land, the railcar. And now this. She did not smile, but something in her posture shifted. Subtle, firm. She wasn't here by accident, not in the way she had thought. Not just pushed out, not just passing through. Evelyn walked back to her corner, placed the satchel beside her coat. Then she reached for the photograph, unwrapped it carefully, set it upright against the seat. Thomas looked out from the glass. The same quiet expression, the same steady presence. Evelyn met his gaze, not searching, not asking, just seeing. "You knew," she said quietly. The words stayed close. The railcar held them. She sat down. The storm faded further. The air shifted again, and for the first time since she had opened the satchel, Evelyn felt it clearly. Not the past, not the loss, something else. Something he had left behind. Not for anyone, for her. And it had been waiting. All this time, exactly where she had needed to look. Morning arrived differently after that. Not quieter, not louder, just clearer. Evelyn woke before the light fully came in, her eyes opening to the dim outline of the railcar's interior. For a moment, she didn't move. The events of the night before settled into place slowly, like pieces finding their edges. The satchel rested beside her. Still there. Not imagined. She sat up carefully, her joints stiff, her breath steady. Then she reached for it. Not to open it again, just to touch it, to confirm the weight, the reality. She nodded once to herself, almost unconsciously, then set it aside. There was work to do. Not because she had to, but because now she understood something she hadn't before. This place wasn't just shelter. It had been built, prepared. And if it had been prepared, then it could be restored. Evelyn stood and moved through the railcar with new attention, noticing more, seeing more. The notes she had read the night before came back to her in pieces, measurements, reinforcements, small details she hadn't fully understood at first. Now they began to align. She walked to the section where the floor dipped slightly, knelt, pressed her hand against it. It wasn't weak, just uneven. Her eyes moved along the seam, then to the wall, then back again. She stood, walked to the far end, checked the opposite side, compared. The difference was consistent. Not damage, adjustment, intentional. She went back to the satchel and opened it again. This time, she searched. Not reading everything, looking for specific things. Her fingers moved through the pages, slower than before, but more directed. Then she found it. A sketch. Rough but clear. The outline of the railcar. Marked sections, notations in the margins. Her eyes followed the lines, the dip in the floor. Marked, reinforced beneath. She glanced back at the spot, then back to the paper. It matched. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Not relief. Recognition. She folded the paper carefully and set it aside. Then she stood again. Moved to the wall near her sleeping space, pressed gently along the surface. Listening. The sound changed in small increments, some sections solid, others slightly hollow. Not empty, just layered. She stepped back, looked again, then nodded. "All right," she said softly. The word felt right. She didn't wait. She began, using what she had. A loose board from the far end, a piece of metal she had moved the day before. She carried them carefully, testing their weight, their strength. She returned to the uneven section of the floor. Knelt. Set the board in place. Pressed, adjusted. Not perfect, but stable. She stood slowly, testing her balance over it. It held. Evelyn allowed herself a small breath. Then she moved on. Hours passed without her noticing. The sun climbed. The air warmed. Inside the railcar, the smell shifted again. Not just dust now, but something else. Movement. Change. By midday, she stepped outside again. Not to rest, to look. The railcar stood the same from the outside. Rust, weeds, silence. But she saw it differently now. Not as something left behind. Something waiting to be claimed. She turned slowly, scanning the surrounding land. Nothing had changed. But she noticed more. The way the ground sloped slightly toward the west. The direction of the wind. The way the sun struck one side of the railcar longer than the other. Details. All of it useful. All of it part of something larger. She went back inside. This time her movements were quicker, more certain. She adjusted the seat she had been using, shifted it slightly closer to the window, improved the light. She took the photograph from where she had set it and moved it to a more stable spot. Not hidden, not tucked away, visible, intentional. The satchel she placed beneath the seat. Not out of sight, but protected. She worked through the afternoon, fixing what she could, improving what she understood, leaving what she didn't. She didn't rush. She didn't guess. She followed what she knew, what she could confirm. Late in the day, a sound reached her, different from the wind, not inside the railcar. Outside. An engine. Distant. Then closer. Evelyn paused. Her body stilled. She stepped toward the door, looked out. A truck moved along the distant path she had walked the day before. Slow, dust trailing behind it. It didn't stop. Didn't turn. Just passed through. A figure inside. Too far to see clearly, but enough to notice. Evelyn watched until it disappeared. Then she stepped back inside. Closed the door slightly. Not fully. Just enough. She didn't feel threatened. But she was aware of the place, of herself in it, of the fact that she was no longer invisible here, even if no one had stopped, even if no one had spoken. The day continued. The light softened. Evening returned. But this time, the railcar felt different. Not because it had changed completely, but because she had. Evelyn sat down in her space, her hands resting on her knees, her breath steady. The work she had done was small, simple, but it held. The floor beneath her was more stable. The air moved more evenly. The space felt hers. Not by ownership, not yet, but by effort. She reached down and pulled the satchel closer, opened it once more, not to search, just to confirm. The papers were still there. Her name, the land, the notes, all of it. She closed it again, set it beside her. Then she leaned back slightly, her gaze lifting toward the ceiling. The panel was still there, closed now, but not the same. She knew what it held, what it meant, and she knew something else now. This place wasn't something she had found by accident. It had been prepared, left, for someone who would notice, who would look, who would take the time to understand. Evelyn's eyes lowered slowly, back to the space around her. Her space. She didn't speak again, didn't need to. The quiet inside her had changed, not gone, but filled, with something steadier, something she could build on. And as the light faded once more and the railcar settled into night, Evelyn Hartwell did not feel like someone who had been pushed out. She felt like someone who had stepped into something. And for the first time, she intended to stay. The railcar settled into the night around her, metal cooling in slow, quiet ticks. The wind had softened, just enough that it no longer pushed. It only passed through. Evelyn sat beneath the ceiling. That same panel. Now just a part of the structure again. Closed, still, ordinary to anyone who didn't know where to press. She reached up, not to open it, but to rest her hand there. Flat, steady. 12 years. That's how long the papers had waited. The plans, the land, the quiet work Thomas had done without saying a word. Not hidden from her. Just waiting for a moment when she would have no choice but to see it. She thought about the house, the room she had been asked to leave. How small everything had felt in the end. And how certain she had been that she was the one being removed from something that mattered. But sitting here now, she understood something she hadn't been able to see then. Nothing had been taken from her that day. She had been moved. Out of something finished, into something unfinished. Something that required her to notice, to decide, to build. The kind of thing no one could hand to you. Outside, the land stretched in every direction, quiet and wide and patient. Inside, the railcar held its shape around her. Not perfect, not complete, but strong, because someone had built it that way and because she had chosen to see it that way. Evelyn lowered her hand from the ceiling. She didn't look for anything else, didn't need to. Some things weren't meant to be opened all at once, just when the time was right. She leaned back, letting the quiet settle in fully this time. Not empty, not waiting. Just hers. And somewhere between the life she had been asked to leave and the one she had stepped into without knowing why, she realized something most people never do. Sometimes the most important thing you carry isn't the answer. It's the part of you that keeps noticing until the answer reveals itself. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't wonder what came next. She already knew. So let me ask you something. What is the one thing in your life that might still be waiting, not to be given to you, but to be noticed?